Welcome to St Mary's Music School's pre-concert event, which is celebrating the second Hill Commission in our Seven Hills project, and this is celebrating Blackford Hill. Before we welcome our special guests, composer Tom David Wilson and astronomer Professor John Peacock, I'd like to just explain a little more about what the Seven Hills project is. Its focus is the year 2023, which marks 50 years since the school opened its doors to instrumentalists. The much-loved writer Alexander McCall Smith has been commissioned to write a poem that reflects the character of each of the 7 Edinburgh hills. Then 7 composers, all with a connection to the school, have each been asked to compose a new work of music inspired by both the hill and one of the poems. The Seven Hill Commission works will be performed across Edinburgh. Senior pupils and professional players will give their first performances in our end-of-term concerts, and afterwards, filmed recordings of these performances will be available online. Nestled in the centre of our Christmas concert at St Cuthbert's, Edinburgh, will be a new work entitled Imagined Conversation on Blackford Hill, written for clarinet quartet by our very own Tom David Wilson. Blackford Hill is a much-loved landmark in Edinburgh, perhaps most famous for being the home to the Royal Observatory, Edinburgh. We are delighted to have Professor John Peacock, astronomer at the observatory, and composer Tom David Wilson in this pre-concert discussion.
So Tom, obviously the first interesting question is why it was you decided to set a piece about Blackford Hill to music.
Well, I was in a very fortunate position because I did get to see all 7 texts by Alexander McCall Smith. He was commissioned as the start of the Seven Hills project, and the Blackford Hill text just jumped out at me for several reasons. Firstly, my wife Emma and I had done that walk fairly recently, and it was a joyous walk. It was a beautiful, beautiful summer's day. The vibrancy of the vivid yellow of the gorse was out. The larks were singing.
And the smell of the gorse as well was fresh. That kind of vanilla essence.
I nearly forgot to mention, yeah, absolutely, all that. So that sight, smell, and the sound of the larks in the air always lifts my heart. The sound of a lark, it makes me think that, well, maybe all our British bird species won't become extinct after all. So that was the first thing. The second thing is our conversation was almost exactly what McCall Smith imagined, an imagined conversation on Blackford Hill. We sort of talked about those things. And we did rest as a bench, and we came to rest and sit on the bench right by the observatory. And we wondered what you guys do in there. So it was uncanny, almost uncanny. It had to be that text. And so I just said, I want to set that text. And so it was, there it is. And the piece tries to express all those things. The feeling of walking, the exuberance and the joy of getting onto the top of the hill with, as we said, the gorse and the smells and the sound of the lark.
And the city just laid out before you.
The city
it's
laid
one of the
out
world's
there.
great views.
It's a wonderful view, yeah. And of course, you look across and see Arthur's Seat with just all that colour there with the gorse from the distance as well. And then the wonderful building that is the observatory. And then we descended on the other side. So there's a simple kind of musical thing where you ascend, have this joyful bit, and then you question these things, and then you descend. Attracted by gravity, a force we cannot see. Zoom. So I guess, and what was I trying to achieve in my piece? Well, I found the piece very difficult. Firstly, I wanted to sort of express joy and a feeling of being uplifted. Now, that's hard. I mean, it's much easier to do doom and gloom and the feeling of despair. That's actually not too difficult to do. But especially in the kind of postmodern aesthetic, it's not so easy. I found that quite a challenge to suggest the joy of shall I say, heliotrope colours on the top of the hill. Once we get up on top of the hill, and there's the vibrant gauze that I was saying, and the songs of the larks, but also a sense of wonder for the universe. All in 9 minutes. How is that going to happen? And then the sense of ascending and then descending at the end.
Yes. Well, as you've saying to me, at least you weren't compelled to set the words of the poem. So
no, I've had the poem.
Free hand from that point of view.
Absolutely, and the poem just jumped out at me. That was the one I had to do. Okay, John, so can I just ask you, how long has the observatory been there?
Well, Edinburgh's had a Royal Observatory since 1776, but not on Blackford Hill. It was originally constructed on one of the other 7 in Calton Hill. And sometimes taxi drivers still take visitors to the wrong place. But over the years, Old Reekie developed more smoke, more street lights. They had to move if they wanted to continue working. And in fact, in the 1880s, all of the 7 hills were surveyed. Put little test telescopes up there and looked at the air quality and so on. In the end,
so why Blackford then?
Well, Blackford got the nod because it was cheaper, of course. There's a railway line that runs right at the bottom of it, and they realised they could build a little branch line that went right up the hill, up Observatory Road, bring all the stone and stuff to the top, and simplify the construction. So a new observatory was designed. Fantastic piece of architecture, really. When I look at the utilitarian buildings that go up in British universities these days, no expense was spared. There's gargoyles, there's little bits of lead pipe working in the form of stars and so on. It was really built to last.
Those things you can see actually from, as you walk past the observatory, you see all those things.
And that was opened in 1894. But of course, astronomy's changed so much in that time. Back then, why did we fund astronomy? Well, it was important for navigation, and the Navy wanted to have it done. Now it's part of the wider scientific infrastructure of the UK. The university didn't teach astronomy initially, whereas now half the people that work on Blackford Hill, like me, are university astronomers lecturing the subject. So that's changed greatly. The other thing that's changed, we don't use the main telescopes any longer. It was realised straight after the Second World War that if you wanted to do something that was internationally competitive, you needed to go abroad. You needed to be on a high mountain, well above the atmosphere, well above the rain and snow and everything. And so Edinburgh really took the lead in a lot of that. We went to Australia, we went to Hawaii. There's also British observatories on the Canary Islands. So these telescopes were developed at a distance. People had to go on tours of duty to be staffing them. So it was a real international nexus, the Royal Observatory. And that period, though, passed. There was a time when, just within the resources of the UK, you could build a telescope that was the biggest in the world. And in those days, let's say, we're talking 1970-ish, that meant a metre, which is 4 metres in diameter. Today, the biggest mirrors in the world are 8 metres to 10 metres in diameter. And by 2026...
Did you say 40 metres?
Well, 39 is the aim. There's a European project called, guess what, the Extremely Large Telescope. Eventually there'll be the even bigger telescope, but we'll be gone by then. And so today the observatory, at least the instrument building part of it, is really connected to those monstrous projects. So you have a piece of instrumentation, something that can detect light and analyze it. It's the size of a house, more or less. That's where they're heading. And it's a project that takes 10 years from first concept to actually putting stuff in packing cases and shipping it around the world.
Are these now international projects rather than the British?
It has to be done collaboratively.
But the thing is that the observatory actually on Blackford Hill has a special part in people's hearts, people from Edinburgh. Do you think, or to what extent do you think that people realise the kind of work that goes on there, or do they still think you look through telescopes?
Well, we do our best. As you know, every year there's Open Doors Day in September, so we have open days for the observatories, and typically there are something like 3,000 people come through the door. Yeah, so we put in a lot of stuff for kids. And of course, there's a visitor centre that I mentioned before that also works with children from local schools. So there's forever coaches full of school kids coming up the hill.
Yes.
At least there were until the pandemic, of course.
Of course.
We hope that will resume.
Another question here from Valerie. What led you to be working as an astronomer here in Scotland?
Well, being in the right place at the right time. Yes, academic astronomy it's quite like music, actually. There's an awful lot of people who like the idea of doing it. And many people start off being educated. And to end up being a professor, you've got to be lucky to an extent. So when I did my PhD in Cambridge, the guy I worked with, my supervisor, got a job as director of the observatory just at the time I was finishing my studies. That sort of break you can't legislate for, but it really set me up for life. So I came here, thought I might just stay for a few years, but 40 years later, here I am. I've no plans to leave.
Yeah.
Because apart from being a fantastic place to work, every morning I cycle up the hill, look out on the city from my office window, but also as an intellectual environment, it's really first rate, because there's so many world-class research astronomers clustered on Blackford Hill that every day there's somebody to interact with and spark ideas off each other.
Absolutely. So that part of McCall Smith's text about what do you think they see there, the answer, everything, I think, is kind of...
Yeah, it really is, because
insightful.
we do astronomy from the smallest things, comets within the solar system, through formation of planets, formation of stars within galaxies, formations of galaxies themselves, and the whole universe. And that's what I do personally, is cosmology. So it's really trying to understand how everything in the universe formed, starting from very simple initial state. And the amazing thing is we can look back to a time where everything that we can see with the best and biggest telescopes, so tens of billions of light years distance, I can talk about a time when all of that was small enough to have been held in my hand, because the universe is expanding. Once upon a time, everything was very small and dense, and over time it's got bigger. And what we're trying to do is to trace the origin of stars and planets and people and you and me back to that very simple initial state. And it's amazing how much progress has been made in 40 years.
It is amazing, yeah, because I have followed this. I've been a keen amateur follower of astronomy since I was a boy, and it never ceases to just blow my mind. That idea that the universe you could have held in your hand, it's something of that majesty I was trying to get in my piece, but I don't know. We'll have to wait to see whether that comes across or not. Yeah, all right. Well, another question from Valerie. I mean, is it a good time, do you think, to go to this one here? So she writes, "It strikes me that both of you are working very much in the abstract, in worlds where perception is the only way to experience form. I can't pick up a piece of music or go and visit Mars." Well, actually, she could go and visit Mars. I mean, if it was actually...
Getting back will be more difficult.
Getting back will be more difficult. But she could never pick up a piece of music. So that abstract thing is interesting. I've always thought that music is the most abstract of the arts.
But more so than the mathematics.
Now that actually, I've got a question ready for you that I'll refer to that in a few moments, because I'm so pleased that you mentioned that, because you class mathematics as an art. So that can we come back to that?
Yeah, by all means.
Yeah. So I did something like, for example, the Bach Art of Fugue. It doesn't even specify the instruments. It just seems it's in that kind of music of the spheres. It's in that kind of meta realm, and it's something, I guess, that until Valerie couched that question, I'd just taken for granted that it is this abstract thing that exists here. Even when musicians play it in the air, maybe the music doesn't really exist in those vibrations in the air. It's what the audience hears in their brains. But I don't know how the perception or the abstract for you and your work, if there's any kind of correlation between the two there.
Well, I don't think music is perhaps quite as abstract as Valerie made out. I mean, I see music and mathematics as both very empirically grounded subjects in the end. You know, we make music because we've heard it in the world around us. You talked about the lark earlier. Or you blow down a piece of tubing and you get the harmonic series. So the laws of physics provide us with the notes, and that automatically stimulates our brains in sympathy with what the real universe is doing, and then we just elaborate on that. And mathematics is the same. You know, counting things. Well, here are our fingers. We use them quite often still.
Base 10. Yeah.
Right. So you don't have to invent that. It's already there.
Well,
but then mathematicians make more elaborate structures with that as a starting point. Well, and then there's a big debate in mathematics about whether what happens subsequently is an invention or whether it's a discovery, whether there's a world out there just waiting to be stumbled upon.
That's my question.
And is it the same with music? I mean, was it inevitable that somebody would write Beethoven's Ode to Joy, and it was only a matter of time before somebody came across that tune?
I don't know. I mean, that is a really difficult philosophical situation. I'm still struggling with whether maths is an invention or a discovery. I've had these conversations with composition students before. It's kind of nice that we can't answer it. It's sort of, I think it's nice that is left there. Yeah. But it's sort of, I mean, I want to read out the question I prepared for you because I'm very proud of it, which is, many people think that science is matter of fact and that scientists are not artistic. I'm very suspicious of this idea. What are your feelings about it? And you've already expressed that you see maths as
I've answered it. I mean, it's the difference between good and bad science, I guess, or good and okay science. I mean, I think what I value, you know, if I look at my colleagues and think who are the special people, the ones I have the most respect for, they're the ones you'd label as creative. So, you know, somebody can have an idea that's immensely fruitful, and the whole subject kind of witters along for a while, just putting fine detail on some of the things we already understand quite well. And then somebody looks at it in a new way or opens up a question that nobody thought to answer. Then the rest of us rush through the door that's been opened. And you can't produce those sort of advances algorithmically. In a way, so maybe you could say science is more creative than music, right? Because a musician, I mean, not that I've ever composed or ever will, but you've got a set of techniques. I mean, Bach and the Archifugue is the archetype. He's got this machinery, and all right, each production of it is a unique thing, but nevertheless, he was just exercising those techniques. I can do this stuff. I've got these knobs, and I can turn them. Let's see what this thing is capable of.
Well,
but to think of the idea of a fugue in the first place, that's something else, right? That's
right. That's absolutely something. So we have well-developed technique, and when one's technique as a composer is very well developed, the danger is you wind up the machine, as you say, and you let it go, and out comes the piece. And the challenge is to do something above that. And so, yeah, sure. I mean, Bach could write a fugue in the morning before breakfast, but then that other step to come up with Der Kunst der Fuge is that extra sort of level of creativity. And I've always thought that science at the cutting edge is extraordinarily creative, and like you say, you can't do those things algorithmically. That there's a flash of inspiration in someone's brain somewhere.
But on the other hand, maybe there's a distinction in that in music or any of the creative arts, the resulting product is unique to the individual. There's something about the person who made it that's in there. And I think the way we like to think about science, Well, actually, okay, scientists would love you to think it's exactly the same. You know, I had this idea, nobody else could possibly have dreamt of it. It's all me. But that's because we tend to have big egos. But actually, throughout the history of science, you know, you take somebody as unique as you could imagine, like Einstein. If Einstein had died in 1904, we would still have had special relativity in 1905 from somebody else. You know, so often ideas are just in the air, and some lucky person is in the right place to the right time and stumbles on it.
But is that right? I mean, someone like Feynman, for example, who had as far as I can see, you had a kind of very left field way of looking at things.
Particularly original, but
yeah,
you know, mostly you feel it's only a matter of time, though.
Before someone else.
So you know, with a lot of even big advances, you think, okay, it might have been 6 months before somebody else thought of that. Maybe with Feynman it might have been 10 years, but there's a feeling it's just a matter of time, because a lot of these things, one thing triggers another. And this is something I wanted to reflect back to you, that how much, as a composer, do you take from what's gone before? Because when I look at my own scientific outputs, the better parts of it have often come from going over past work, just not with a view of trying to achieve anything other than just understand better what other people have done. But as you go through that, you see, oh, there's a different way of doing it, and that makes more sense to me, and sometimes other people agree with you. So, you know, composers, you have to write fugues as well, even though it's not considered frontline anymore.
No. Well,
I mean, so how helpful are those past techniques?
Well, it depends.
Is it the same in music?
Yes, it is the same. But it depends if I consider myself a postmodern composer. And there is this theory that aesthetics go in waves, so that you have a peak of modernism and then a trough of postmodernism, but there's no kind of implication of equality in that. It just, we have areas or times when we're really quite avant-garde, and if you're still looking to the past, you're considered reactionary. I would say that the last high point of modernism would be perhaps 1970, and there's a rather strange phenomenon all over the world in the mid-70s. Composers who didn't know each other all felt the need to reassess their aesthetic and to reassess music of the past, and hey, postmodernism. For me, who studied in depth music of the past and the techniques of past composers, I just imagine someone like Brahms, say. A colleague said to me the other day, oh, of course, no, it's the other year, to put it right. I said, yeah, of course we all want to be Brahms, because Brahms revered the music of the past. It informed his music, but his music was of its day, of its time. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to be able to say that of myself. That, yeah, I've studied music of the past. I revere that of it, which is great, and yet I'd hope my music is of its day. So that this piece on Blackford Hill could only have been written in 2021. But of course, it uses techniques and refers to and is part of a long tradition of Western European classical chamber music. Even the format is a clarinet quartet. It's clarinet and 3 strings. I mean, I'm kind of bigging it up.
Looking forward to hearing it.
Well, I hope it lives up to expectation. I'm feeling a bit nervous. I hope it's received well. I'm quite fond of it now, but it was difficult. I did find it quite challenging.
Mm. Well, if the observatory has been of any help in creating that, then I'm very happy.
It took me 2 attempts, by the way. There's a previous version that was ditched, and the second attempt, I think, is much more successful. But we'll see. Yeah.
Very good.
On Blackford Hill, my dear, where in summer the fields in their promised fullness of grass are sweet upon the air, where a few miles off the shy pentlands suggest a hinterland of farms, of rivers, and of border towns, we rested on a half-completed walk. You pointed to the observatory nearby and said, "What do you think they rarely see?" I could have answered everything, I think. For Blackford is the only Scottish hill on which the ordinary course of work is to question how planets come to be, about how worlds and all that they contain, flowers and stock exchanges and waterfalls, developed as they did, routinely talk of an unseen world of particles, how they move and die, spark briefly, things beyond the grasp of two average walkers, unversed in physics, for whom the journal Nature is too hard to comprehend. You say, Professor Higgs worked not far from here, barely half a mile away. I nod and say, he did, and point out the path we must take to descend, drawn by gravity, another force we cannot see.